Hello, everyone, and welcome to CG's webinar 330. I'm Ho Mok from Lingnan University in Hong Kong. And today we will be hearing from two presidents dialogue, President Leonard Cheng from Lingnan University Hong Kong, and President McDonald, President of Great Lakes College Association. They will share with us a topic focusing on liberal arts and humanities in East Asia and the US. So I will now pass over to President McDonald. He will share with you about liberal arts and humanities with focus on the US. Mike, is your floor.
Thank you very much, Kaho, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I also want to thank the Center for bringing together this international webinar series on a really important set of topics. And finally, I want to thank Leonard for joining me today for this webinar. It's very late in Hong Kong, very early in the US, so it's great to partner with you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself shortly to give you context on the perspective that I will share with you today. But at the outset, I want to frame my reflections in ways that support and challenge the premise of this webinar series. I agree that a purely economic assessment of the impact of higher education is too narrow and is dismissive of the nobler purposes of higher education. In an increasingly globalized world, we need people who are curious, can reason well and think critically, can innovate and view problems through multiple lenses, can communicate and are accepting of others who have different life experiences. At the same time, we must acknowledge that the economic impacts of higher education are a part of the reality of our current political and societal context, certainly in the US. A focus only on the arts and humanities also is too narrow. At least for me, a liberal arts education is about study across a broad swath of human knowledge and disciplinary perspectives and approaches. A liberal arts education is also much more than the content of what we teach or learn. I believe that narrow view of education is problematic. Giving content primacy ignores the pivotal learning and developmental contributions of how we teach and learn and the context in which it's done. For me, this context is in a relatively small, close-knit, mostly residential, engaged and interactive community with many different types of learning experiences that happen in traditional learning spaces, classrooms, labs, studios, and outside of those spaces, in the hallways and professors' offices, in the dining hall, on the athletic field. So who am I and what have I done that shaped these perspectives? I was born in Taiwan, lived there for 10 years before coming to the US. I was an undergraduate at Davidson College, a small residential liberal arts college in North Carolina. I earned my PhD in mathematics from Duke University. Subsequently, I taught for 15 years and did various administrative work at Occidental College, a small residential liberal arts college in Los Angeles. And by the way, one of its claims to fame is that President Barack Obama went there for 2 years. Next, I served as provost at Kalamazoo College, a small residential liberal arts college in Michigan for 10 years. For the past 4.5 years, I've been leading the Great Lakes Colleges Association, or GLCA, a consortium of 13 residential liberal arts institutions in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, here in the Midwest of the US. We also coordinate the programming for the Global Liberal Arts Alliance, made up of the 13 GLCA colleges and 17 institutions around the world that have the liberal arts philosophy as a core of their curriculum and commitment, like Lingnan, where Leonard is president. So as you see, my whole experience is grounded in the US small residential liberal arts institution. And I believe strongly that what shapes undergraduate students who study at these institutions is a complex combination of what they study and learn there, how they study and learn there, how they interact with others, whether it's other students, faculty, or staff, and everything else they do across the institution while they are there studying and learning. I'm not saying that there aren't other models of effective liberal arts education. There are, and I believe there have to be, as I believe the educational models as they develop and evolve are context dependent, which differs across country, culture, and more. I see that very clearly in the Global Liberal Arts Alliance, with institutions in 18 different countries. To successfully deliver a liberal arts education at any of these institutions, the whole of the institution, its mission, its curriculum, must make sense in its national, societal, and political context. And I see this within the GLCA, even though we're all in the US. From Hope College, a Christian mission college that has long had programs in engineering and nursing, something none of the rest of the colleges had, to Wabash College, one of the 4 remaining all-male colleges in the United States, to Earlham College, a Quaker school that operates on consensus, to Oberlin College with a separate yet integrated conservatory of music. My predecessor at GLCA was Rick Detweiler. His recent book, The Evidence Liberal Arts Needs, Lives of Consequence, Inquiry, and Accomplishment, brings data to the argument that an education based on the types of things we do at liberal arts institutions leads to more positive life outcomes. He too frames what we do as being more than the subjects we teach. And he identifies 3 distinct but overlapping pieces of the educational ecology. First, purpose. Early on in the founding of our types of institutions in the US, it was about populating the frontier of the United States with trained preachers and teachers. For much of the 20th century, higher education as a public good held primacy, and that led to greater state and federal support for access to college here. I'll note in a bit, this seems to have been eroding, and attacks on higher education generally and on liberal arts education in particular have increased and funding levels decreased. Second, context. In our close-knit communities, with the use of engaging pedagogy by our faculty and the engagement of faculty and students both in, but also importantly, outside the classroom, and much more. And third, content. Yes, definitely the humanities and arts, but more than that. At our institutions, we tend to expect depth of study, but also very importantly, breadth of study across disciplines and methodologies, as well as the connections we make through this breadth of study. Through survey data of alumni from various types of institutions and across a range of life stages, Rick shows that many of the traditional liberal arts institutional practices have positive impacts on the life outcomes of alumni. Yes, some of it is connected to economic outcomes, but it's also about living a life of consequence through leadership positions and expressed altruism, and living a life of inquiry through continued learning and cultural involvement. Now I want to turn to some of the context and purpose shifts we are seeing in the US and think about the challenges and opportunities these pose for US liberal arts institutions. With these shifts, we are seeing and will continue to see swifter evolution in what a traditional liberal arts institution will look like. And I'll share some examples of that evolution. So first, political and societal shifts. The word liberal has been politicized and mangled into a sense of left-wing indoctrination here in the US, leading to a misunderstanding of what the liberal arts are, and for some, questioning the value of higher education in general. There has been a loss of emphasis on the public benefit of higher education generally, leading to erosion of state and national funding in support of higher education. Just one example in the US is the Pell Grant, which supports college access to lower income families. In the mid-1970s, this grant supported 75% of the cost of attending a four-year public institution. Today, it covers only 28%. With concerns about cost come a sense of heightened importance about the economic benefit of a college degree, a benefit that is clear from the data, but may be hard to grasp by a family whose annual income is the same as an institution's sticker price. This also pushes policymakers to use data on things like first-year salary as a means of assessing the benefits of higher education. That's a limited assessment at best. A second issue is the increased emphasis on how college prepares students for jobs and careers. Families want to know that what they spend for higher education will lead to a successful placement after college. But the nature of the workplace has changed so dramatically, with the average college student now expected to hold upwards of 17 different jobs over the span of their work life. And some of those jobs don't even currently exist. So arguably, I would say a liberal arts education is one of the best ways to prepare for such dramatic changes in workforce needs. But part of our challenge is helping students translate what they learn and do on our campuses into language and outcomes that employers really understand and value. A third issue facing those of us in the US is an impending demographic cliff, with a college entry population expected to peak in 2025, that's just 2 years from now, then decline for the next 12 years. There's worry that the pandemic may have exacerbated this issue as well. There are also differential shifts regionally, and unfortunately for the GLCA colleges, although all do draw nationally and most internationally, the Midwest states show moderate to significant decline in high school graduates over the period 2012 to 2032. But liberal arts education and our types of institutions aren't static, and they never have been. We have evolved over time and across contexts, and have changed in response to a wide range of societal, economic, and other forces. Today, as I reflect on where we are with liberal arts education in the US, I think we're at a real inflection point, and we are seeing and will see a swifter evolution for these types of institutions. I want to use a few examples to share how they are responding to these context and purpose shifts while continuing to center their liberal arts missions. I'll start with two examples of institutions that are centering their commitment to the humanities, arts, and sciences while launching new programs. So at DePaul University, a new strategic plan strengthens its commitment to the humanities, arts, and sciences and extends these liberal arts methods and philosophy to a new school of business and leadership, as well as a new school tentatively called the Creative School, which will focus on creativity, media arts, music, and the performing arts. Denison University has developed a newer set of majors grounded in the humanities that are significant draws for students and families and tie to emergent post-college opportunities. These include data analytics, global health, environmental studies, global commerce, politics, and public affairs. And I stress that the development of many of these were co-led by faculty from the humanities. Two examples of the increased emphasis on connecting liberal arts learning and developmental outcomes to career exploration include Denison's Knowlton Center for Career Exploration, which has embraced a liberal arts approach to career exploration, having students ask deeper and reflective questions as they consider their future after college. Bates College, which is not a GLCA institution, launched a Center for Purposeful Work that is unique by building on the premise that preparing students for lives of meaningful work lies at the heart of the liberal arts mission. It's developmental over 4 years and spans the entirety of the liberal arts experience from curricular to co-curricular, athletic, and residential. And it ensures that students are actively involved in work in various forms throughout their time at college. An example of a program that speaks to the civic engagement element of liberal arts education is Wabash College's Democracy and Public Discourse program that seeks to develop in students the kind of deliberation, discussion, debate, and advocacy that cultivate democracy, and have students use these skills to foster productive public discussions in the community. And finally, an example of a new way to fund college to make it more affordable. At Hope College, they're working to establish a long-term strategy toward a completely different funding model of paying it forward, where students can attend Hope tuition-free, funded by the generosity of those who have come before them, and they graduate with a commitment to also pay it forward by donating to Hope so future students can have the same transformational experience. I will note that generally most college campaigns I know of right now do focus quite a bit on building scholarship endowment to support affordability and access. There will always be disruptors and shifts in the context in which we do higher education. And as you can tell, I'm a very strong proponent of the liberal arts educational approach to higher education. And there is data that shows that the approach we take at our types of institution, having to do with content, but also with a purpose and context in which we engage this breadth of content, leads to more positive life outcomes. And that matters. It is an excellent educational model. And as we move forward, we must work to keep the best of what we do and how we do it in ways that stay true to our liberal arts missions, even as we adapt to various societal and context shifts. So thank you, and I will pass things back to Koha.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So may I now invite President Cheng to share the PowerPoint and also have your speech. Thanks.
Okay, I have difficulty now finding my PowerPoint. So maybe let me speak without my PowerPoint.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, Leonard, please go.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the center for inviting me to share my observations and thoughts on the role of arts and humanities in the current situation. At a time when the same subjects are emphasized and become very popular. My conclusion, based on what I have observed in East Asian countries, and also based on the vision of the future, which is summarized by the term Industry 5.0. Now, 5.0, Industry 5.0 is only a concept that is a vision or concept that's about 5 years old. And before that, there was an Industry 4.0 that is about 11 years old. And that one has been criticized as ruled by robots, because both about flexible manufacturing and automation. But one is regarded as humanless, and the other is human-centered. Together, the other aspects of this new vision of 5.0 is to deal with the issue of sustainability as well as resilience, right? So based on both set of observation and understanding, I come to the conclusion that liberal arts and humanity may be down because STEMs are more popular at the time being, but they will not be out because they'll be needed. So first of all, let me go through the university, the history of university development in China, Japan, and South Korea. Now, all of these countries, going back centuries and thousands of years, they adopted the Confucian model of higher education. And in Confucian, in the Confucian model, they emphasize the person in the students. So the virtues, the moral responsibility, and so on and so forth. Now, the Confucian University, Confucian School, actually has a long tradition, as long as the Western, as long as the liberal education tradition in the West. So the West, you trace back to ancient Greece, ancient Athens, in ancient Greece, and the Roman period. In China, this tradition goes way back to Confucius. But while both traditions emphasize the importance of whole person education, that means they want to have a wide spectrum of skills and knowledge. They actually differ in terms of what knowledge and what skills. In China, we talk about the 6 arts. And in ancient Europe, we talk about the 7 arts. But when you look at the difference between the 6 and 7 arts, that may actually predict how things might differ 2,000 years later. Because in China, the focus, one of the subjects in the 6 arts that you don't find the 7 art is propriety. That's the Chinese side. How to be a person, how you position yourself relative to the other members of society, and how to really self-cultivate to be a virtuous person. Now, in the West, in ancient Europe, you have subjects that don't have counterparts in the six stars in China. You have logic, you have astronomy, and you have geometry, right? And what I try to say is that despite the common goal of educating the whole person, the differences in the subject matters actually will have serious consequences. So 2,000 years later, the Eastern Asian country that follow the Confucian model would have to suddenly learn something new and developing modern universities following the European and American models. So, the Confucian model of education and its governance model was considered the roots of its weaknesses, the weaknesses of Eastern Europe, Asian countries, weakness in industry, weakness in science, weakness in military, and so on and so forth. So therefore, for their own survival, they had to learn from the European model. So Japan was the first one to do so. It all happened in the late 19th century. Then China, then at the same time also around the same time, Korea. So basically for them, they learn about science and engineering and medicine from Europe and the US, but then they also try to preserve their own culture, their own history, their own values. So for instance, the University of Tokyo was established in the late 19th century. And while it's really set out to learn what the West was strong in, it makes sure certain subject matters are covered and were given first priority. So without the PowerPoint, I just remember from my memory that the most important thing is the Japanese culture, the Japanese literature, and then to be followed by the Confucian ethics, the morals, and then the Western science and technology. So there is a two-tier, and they make sure when they had a history department, that history department not only covers world history, but also covers Japanese history. And similarly, same thing happened in South Korea and in China. About China, for instance, China was a partially colonized by the Western powers as well as Japan in the form of areas that are ruled by the foreigners, the so-called concessions, right? And so back then, the Chinese realized that in order for them to survive as a nation, they have no choice except to learn from the European model about university education. But in all cases, in China, for instance, the university's role is, besides the academics, is nation building. It's about reform of society, learning good habits, keeping the traditional culture and virtues, and they need to reform themselves. Now, then if we kind of go forward, the people of the Republic of China, in the early years, in the early 1950s, they actually adopted the Soviet model, cutting up the existing universities and reassemble them to make special universities, specialized universities. At that time, general education, liberal education would be considered useless because they only care about the specialists. But after the 1978 economic reform launched by Deng Xiaoping, then there was an attempt and actually action to reverse some of those changes and put together comprehensive university again, because they needed to train graduates who can succeed and do well in the market economy, not in the plain economy. Then in the mid-90s, the Chinese came up with the concept so-called cultural quality education. So they emphasize critical thinking skills, communication skills, and collaboration. But that's really no different from general education as we find them in US universities. So that's pretty much equivalent to general education, even though they use the term cultural quality education. Then about 1999 or 98, they changed the term again by dropping cultural and just quality education. And so they expanded the scope of what students need to really acquire in terms of skills. They added entrepreneurship and creativity, right, among other virtues. So traditionally in China, such education would be called Boya education. So indeed, in some of the Chinese universities, including well-known ones, they set up Boya colleges. So for instance, that's a Boya college is found at Dr. Sun Yat-sen University. And at Peking University, they established a similar college in honor of their legendary President Chai Yun-pei. And at Tsinghua University, they have a so-called Xingya University. Xingya means New Boya. So in addition to these well-known universities, other universities also establish Boya colleges. They set up so-called cultural education centers and bases. So they have achieved a lot in terms of bring about this foundational education that ideally every major should be built on such a foundation, which emphasize not only the 4 C's, the so-called 21st century skills, but also other attributes, personal virtues, creative, entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. While they have achieved a lot, there was also problems. And that is, students do not regard the cultural education courses as very interesting, as very important, and found them to be low standard, offered by second-class teachers, and the classes are too big to have meaningful discussions. Now, in fact, such problem also occur in Japan's history at some point of time, right? So that's the Chinese situation. What I try to say is that here in China, at least from the point of the government, science and education, science and technology on one hand, arts and humanities on the other hand, students need them all at the undergraduate level. So therefore, humanity and art will not disappear, because that's part of the requirement. Now, do they really do it? There's some problem. Some university administrators and professors don't think that they are very useful, even though the government think that is very critical, but they don't necessarily do it. So that's one of the problems. So in Japan, you have, some universities have a Buddhist tradition, some have Confucian traditions, others have more European and American liberal education tradition. So if you look at the curriculum that they have today, you find that the most well-known universities such as University of Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, they all have either general education requirements, or they talk about liberal arts courses, or they require liberal arts courses to be taken by students. So even the, I believe it's Tokyo Institute of Technology, maybe the equivalent, the Japanese counterpart of MIT, they also require students to take arts and humanities, at least 10 credits, if I remember correctly, and 6 more that can be or also in arts and humanities. So, and then Japan, from the late 19th century, they introduced American-style liberal arts institutions. Now, the same thing happened in Korea, and especially South Korea. Now, Korea, one of the older universities, I think it's 500 to 600 years history. In the past 500-600 years ago, it was patterned after the Chinese higher education system. It's called, and today, it is still highlighting the Confucian values, but it is a modern research universities. And you look at them, or look at Korea University, look at National Seoul University, they also have either general education or some of these liberal arts courses requirements. And in fact, South Korea may be even more Americanized than the Japanese university, because, you know, there was the World War II. South Korea was actually managed by the US for some period of time. It was I suppose the term used is either trustee or something like that. And then after Korean War, the US provided a great deal of assistance to the higher education system in South Korea in terms of training of professors, the academic planning, and the system of quality assurance, and so on and so forth. So Korea is very much Americanized when it comes to its university education, undergraduate education. Again, arts and humanities are required, right? So cannot be ignored. And I would say that beginning in the 70s, there was some so-called academic nationalism, the over concerns that the South Korean or the Korean tradition, history, and culture will be lost. So the government responded by setting up an institute of Korean studies and to promote Korean culture, values, and history. And so that's the situation. So when you sum it up, all of these countries, East Asian countries, in their undergraduate education, they, at least in principle, require both arts and humanities on one hand, and science and engineering on the other hand. So I don't see them really, they'll be lost. I don't think so. Nationalism and national value will make sure that they pay attention to arts and humanities, because the technology might be similar across countries. What differentiates countries from the others is their own history, their own culture, and own values. So therefore, from that point of view, I believe, it will be important to East Asian countries. By that, I mean arts and humanity. Now, then you look at things from the so-called the future world of automation and flexible manufacturing. Now, if we stick to the older vision, Industry 4.0, then it's all about machine. It's all about how people can become more effective. But in the last 4 or 5 years, 5 or 6 years, that was criticized as ignoring the needs of human beings. It was just a rule by robots, right? Maybe automation without a heart or without a soul. And so therefore, the current conception of future industrial society is that automation and smart manufacturing should really focus on human needs. So therefore, the key idea behind Industry 5.0 is human-centric. And in addition, given what has happened, to the supply chains during the COVID period and the disruptions in many markets caused by the war in Ukraine, got people to think about resilience and sustainability, of course, the climate and all that. And I argue that in this new world, where Industry 5.0 has the three features I mentioned, human-centric, resilience, and also sustainability, how can you not need humanity and arts? Because number one, human-centric, right? But even from the point of view of sustainability and resilience, you need creativity. And that has, we oftentimes believe that liberal arts education is an effective way of, developing the creativity in the students, in addition to the other critical skills, such as critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, right? And even when people think about, well, what sort of job will be available in the future, when we live in that world, in the world of Industry 5.0, and people come with different types of jobs, they all have to do with the application of IT, but none of them can ignore the human, because when you're doing marketing, when you're doing, finance, fintech, you cannot forget about the human beings. It's all about how to serve the human better. And when they even mention that in future, there will be a job called chief, automation officer. So the chief automation officer, of course, under him or her, there will be other automation officer. So when they are doing automation work, working robots, would they not face problems such as psychology, industrial psychology, and so on and so forth? And they require understanding of human beings. And therefore, from both the national history, culture, and values of the East Asian countries, or from the human side of Industry 5.0, the industrialization that we might run into, I see that arts and humanity will never be forgotten. And I know the time's probably coming is up, so I'll stop here. So basically, I'm saying arts and humanity may be down, but they're not out. They are needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, President Cheng. And thank you, President McDonald and President Cheng's wonderful speech, and also stimulating us to think about the role of arts and humanity in the broader context when we are driven by STEM-driven economy. So I see colleagues writing in the chat room. May I now invite Simon Gray, Dr. Gray. Please unmute yourself and please ask your question to both speakers. Simon, your floor.
Thank you. Thank you to both the speakers. That's really interesting to hear both the similarities and the differences in the educational systems. So my question is to both of you. It has to do with there's a variety of pressures that are on higher education today. What about the role of accrediting bodies? What impact are they having on the directions that colleges and universities are taking? Thank you.
Simon, please. Sorry, I might, please.
I would say that currently, I think one of the places where U.S. accreditors are really exerting pressure and helping institutions focus on how well they do what they say they do is around sort of a push for quality improvement, quality assessment and quality improvement, better articulating the outcomes that we say we're after, and assessing those outcomes to see how well we do in supporting students to get towards those outcomes. I think there's also some pressure around financial sustainability, particularly for some of the financially vulnerable institutions. At least in the US, I think their accreditors tend to stay off of sort of program direction and those types of decisions and really give very wide breadth to institutions to do what they want to do. But I think the pressure to better articulate what it is that they want to do and then assess what they want to do, that's where I think they're putting time and pressure. I'll let Leonard.
All right, thank you very much. Now in Hong Kong, we don't have accreditation bodies, but we do have our so-called quality assessment audits. And I think they are similar in the sense that they want to make sure that the quality of education you provide is really up to standard, or it is what you claim it is to be. And I think that's important for us, if our quality assurance audit team finds to be lacking, you know how troublesome that will be for us. We'll be into a great deal of troubles. So therefore, we make sure internally with the quality assurance mechanism, making sure that we deliver what we promise, and also we have to be close to the market, in a sense that we meet, our education meets the demand of society, demand of the labor market.
But as a person working in arts and humanities, I have no problems for buying in your arguments. But how would you convince parents, families, and also world leaders, because they're looking for short-term returns, spending on higher education for a few years, they look for graduate employment and the freshman salary? What would then be your strategies, Mike, and also Leonard?
Well, I think I don't think it's a problem to look at the salary first year out of college. But if you think of that as the only assessment of the quality and outcome of higher education, that's problematic. And the reality is a first-year engineer is going to make more than a first-year high school teacher. So that's just part of the reality. So it's not that. I think it's the use of selective metrics and a narrow set of metrics that's very problematic. So I think you've got to look longer term. People who are coming out of liberal arts programs, have a lot more flexibility in what they can learn new that's different. These jobs that don't exist 10 years from now, if you're being trained for a job, you can go into a job, but how are you going to learn the next job? Whereas I think liberal arts folks, we know how to learn and we know how to transition. Leonard?
Okay. Well, in Hong Kong, Meg, you'll be surprised that if our graduates get into teaching, even primary school, they'll make a lot more money than the beginning salary in engineering, right? But I think the thing is that parents need to look beyond just money and beyond the first job. There's a study in the US, if I remember correctly, it may be a study done at Georgetown University that really used a data set of salary over the working life of graduates of different universities. And they found the following two facts, and economists could develop theory to rationalize it. And that is, even though the engineers of the specialized education degree holders make more money at the beginning, their salary profile or salary trajectory is flatter compared with those who receive liberal arts education. And then how do you compare? So one comparison is the net present value added. And it turns out that there's a premium when you look at net present value added over a 40-year period, and the premium might be something like 8 or 9%. Not a huge number, but not a small number either. So yes, if you look further into the future, they don't do worse than the graduates of specialized universities, specialized programs. So I would say one of it is education, to educate the parents possibly. But I think we also need to make sure for liberal university, we need to make sure that we actually do as much as we possibly can to help the student get a job. Because I think the worst thing is that the liberally educated cannot find jobs. Then you lose, you no longer be incredible when you talk about the future and they cannot find jobs. So here at Lingnan, actually helping our students in their career development and not just placement, but actually help them to understand the job market before they go to the job market is one of our jobs. And so for us, we take it very seriously because most of our students come from the graduate family. And for them, getting a job upon graduation, that's very important. And to the university, that is also where your credibility lies.
Okay, thank
We
you,
cannot
Leonard.
just promise. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I see Professor Wolf Heiho has a question to raise. Wolf, could you unmute yourself and share your question?
Yes, I just want to thank both of the speakers. I think it's just been giving us a very broad and stimulating picture of both similarities and differences across the East Asian situation and North America, Europe. I just wanted to ask both of you to say something about the role of language and language learning. What I found very striking is both in Japan and China, everything has been translated, particularly in Japan. It's just amazing. There's nothing in the European tradition that's not there out there for students. But unfortunately, in the English-speaking world, it's quite different. How much is available, how much is put into the curriculum, not only in English, but the European languages and so on. Who chooses? What role does it play? In the STEM areas, it's usually seen as a technical issue, accuracy. But if you go into philosophy, history, the humanities, it's a deeply interpretive issue. And I'm even thinking, even in STEM, there's an element of interpretation, that it's not just technical accuracy and translation. So I'd just love to hear some thoughts on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wolf.
Thank you.
You always make me go first. Personally, I feel that language and language learning and cultural learning is essential in a liberal arts education. I went to an institution where there was a language requirement. Most of the GLCA, but not all of the GLCA institutions still maintain a language requirement. Many of them emphasize study abroad as sort of an immersive cultural experience that is an important part of the learning. So personally, I feel it's critically important. I would say broadly in the United States, I'm not sure that we as a culture feel the importance of learning another language. We expect everybody else to speak English. But from an educational perspective, I see it as critical.
Leonard, please.
Right. I think, first of all, personally, I think that understanding other languages, that's very important. And from a practical point of view, understanding the language of the more advanced economies, societies, and so on and so forth, that's maybe necessary for survival. So the reason maybe it's less important to you guys in terms of translating stuff from the other countries is that you're at the top. So maybe you feel there's less pressure. We're not at the top. You better translate. You better understand. You better learn. Just as I said early on, for too long, China and the Eastern Europe, Asian countries were comfortable with the Confucian model until the European arrived. Then we were all in trouble. So we had no choice except to learn. And how do you learn? Number one, you translate. I remember reading something in a book of Rick Detweiler that Mickey showed earlier. He talked about the Islamic Golden Age. And they brought knowledge from all over the world and translated them into the Arabic language, I suppose, at the time. So they had books and other stuff from China, from India, from Western Europe, everywhere. And they all, they were all collected in their house of wisdoms. And so as a result, they were better than anybody because they knew what happened in other places, and other places don't quite know the same. So I would say that's very important. But maybe, the UK and the European countries might find that to be more important and therefore devote more resources to it. But to me, that's very important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I see another colleague raise a question. Kara Godwin, could you unmute yourself and share? Hi,
yeah,
Kara.
Thank you so much. I'd like to actually defer back to Ruth. I see you came off mute. Did you have a response or a follow-up question?
Well, no, I think that was really great what they both said. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. I actually raised two questions and happy to have you address either one. One was the question about bringing together institutions who are working on these issues that you've been talking about today. And I'd love to hear from either of you. I know you're involved in various ways in various organizations. What's the value of that? How is it helping you? How could those kind of organizations do better in helping you? And then the second question, somewhat related, is about what research questions you would like scholars to pursue that would help, again, thinking about these issues, the challenges that institutions are facing, and the challenges that individuals are facing, thinking in the global context about liberal arts education.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kara.
Mickey, you go first.
Always. So because I had an association of 13 institutions, obviously, I think collaboration across institutions is critical and beneficial. Collaboration is also really hard. We get in our lane, we do our thing, and sometimes it's hard to poke your head up and think about what we can do together. I do think a great benefit is that we can learn from each other. In the GLCA context, it's often learning from others in similar situations. What I love about the Global Liberal Arts Alliance is that we can learn from each other in very different contexts. We interpret liberal arts in slightly different ways. Our contexts are certainly very different. And I think we can learn things from people who are doing things differently from us in another context that we may be able to bring to our own context. In terms of a research question, one of the reasons I love Rick's book is that it really is taking a data scholarly interview approach to linking the impact of our types of education to life outcomes. Kaho talked about, how do we bring this to policymakers? How do we communicate this to families? And one of the ways is to have data, to have impact information, but we have to also put it in terms that people will really understand and absorb.
Well, first of all, I belong to the alliance that is led by Mickey, the Global Liberal Arts Alliance. So therefore, by attending various meetings, leadership meeting, or what the other meeting we call liaison meeting, we learn from one another what they do. And sometimes we may work together. But even when we don't work together, we may appreciate our situation better. And we can justify, or we can justify better why we don't do things similarly, because we are working in different environment, different contexts, right? And so I think that's something, I benefit from this alliance. Now in Asia, we actually, Lingnan helped to start a new alliance called Alliance of Asian Liberal Arts Universities. And there we also hold annual meetings. So we learn from one another, and sometimes you discover that you're something that is so much in common and your similar interests, maybe you work together. And I think that's great. So that's what I get from working these alliances. Now, Carol and I recently, we attended a big meeting, annual meeting of the American Association of American Colleges and Universities. And we go to these events, go to these so-called present forum, whatever, then we learn from others about their situation. And so that helped to put ourselves in better perspective. And if we can have something concrete to work on together, that would be better. But even without that, I think it is highly valuable. Kara.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mickey and Leonard, for helping us to think more deeply about the role of arts and humanity in challenging times. I'm sure colleagues would agree that we have gone through a very critical global health crisis, which requires better understanding among ourselves and also to work collaboratively for better solutions and also co-creating better environment for future generation. So I would like to thank both speakers for giving us a very stimulating webinar tonight. And thank you for joining us today. A recording of this session will be posted on CG site tomorrow. And our next webinar, Higher Education in Ukraine, Past Overview, Present Stage and Future Perspective, will take place next Tuesday, same time, 2 p.m. UK time. So thank you very much for joining and wish you have a good weekend. Thanks, Leland and Mickey again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah.